For another fine day here with Why America. Today I'm joined by my dear friend and fellow Toastmaster, Rob Chase. Rob, thank you for coming out this morning.
Two Robs.
Yeah, right? The two Robs. And this is a great one that we have here today. These are all great interviews that I'm doing, and I truly appreciate everyone's time. Both are interviewed and you as the viewers especially. Rob today is going to share with us in about 10 minutes his version of why America and why this country is so important and great to him. Rob, take it away.
Well, this is rather extemporaneous. I've been fairly busy, and I wanted to meet with Rob and agreed to do this because it sounded like a pretty good idea. It's something we really don't think about too much. And for a long time, I think, maybe for just about 40 years, something I took for granted was being an American. And going back to my first thoughts, which were, remember, in fact, I was 3 years old here in Spokane. That's the first thing I really remember thinking, why am I here? And of course, the obvious thing to me was, well, because of my parents. You know, my parents are here, and then my grandparents. In fact, we were at my grandmother's house up on South Hill, and would have been 1956, I think. And then I remember a P-38 from Fairchild flew over, and I thought, I'm going to remember this. So I started remembering things after that. But I was one of those fortunate children that all four grandparents were still living. And in fact, I had met my great-grandfather. He was the oldest person I'd ever met. When I was 5, I remember shaking his hand, and he was feeding the squirrels over there by Chelan. And I was 5, and he was 96. And he actually had been born during the Lincoln administration. And I thought, wow. And I thought later, I shook the hand of someone who was born during the Lincoln administration, and when he was 5 years old, he might have shaken the hands of someone who was alive, during the Revolutionary War. So our country seems old, but it's really still very young, just not that many generations. But I knew my grandparents, and my great-grandfather's son had, Cliff Chase. He had been in World War I, and he walked with a cane. He'd been injured in the Battle of Argonne, and nearly lost his leg, but he had a cane with a snake around it that a German POW had carved for him, and I still have that today. And then, but I thought about, he was in a war. My grandmother's grandfather had been in the Battle of Chickamauga and was wounded and captured, and his stories and all that. So I was really into military things. I didn't understand the concept of the country, but I was wondering why were these guys all fighting each other. So I had a Revolutionary War set with the British and Americans fighting each other, and little cannons, and same thing the Civil War set, and GIs, like my father was a GI in the Pacific. So what were they fighting for? What were they fighting about? Why would someone want to kill or be killed, for something like that? So I thought about those things growing up, but mostly as far as America being exceptional, I was kind of like Europe Junior. So maybe I'm American, that's where I was born at, but my roots came from other countries. So, my grandfather, he was, last name Chase is English. He'd been here for a few hundred years, and several generations. But his wife, my grandmother, was, her parents were from Sweden, and so I had a Swedish grandmother. My other grandmother, my mother's mother, was Norwegian, and it was her grandfather who had been in the Battle of Chickamauga. But they still almost had accents, because they were raised family units and all that, so they kind of had sort of like a accent that was somewhat almost like folksy or pioneer or whatever, with a little bit of, their own native tongue twanging, thrown in. And then I actually had a grandfather, my mother's father, who came from Greece. He came over here when he was 15 years old on his own.
Wow.
In 1902. But they all came over because they weren't really, they heard about America and they heard about freedom. You can be who you want to be. It wasn't about someone ruling you, like in those lands, the king still ruled. It was about self-rule, Liberty is the right to self, as Edward Snowden said. And so I thought about liberty a lot. And then when I was 5 one day, my mom took me to school. I kind of lost a lot of that liberty. School was, I loved recess. I excelled at recess. But, having to sit there and watch the clock and all that, that was something that, you know, I really wasn't into. So, you know, unless the subject was very interesting, I was completely bored. So I have a friend, he's Ukrainian Baptist minister here in town, and his name is Alex Kaprian. But he was raised in the Soviet Union, and he said you didn't really have the freedoms. You know, he was a Christian, but not only did the other kids make fun of him, the teachers made fun of him too. And so he actually became a Baptist minister, and formed a group. It was one of the first groups of Slavic people to come here to Spokane. But he had told me once, I'll never forget it, about freedom. He said, you don't really appreciate freedom until you don't have it. You know, so all those years I was just, you know, I didn't really appreciate it because I lived in the land of the free and the home of the brave. I really hadn't found anything else. But then suddenly when I got the internet, you know, in mid-90s, I started reading all of the stuff that I'd never heard in civics class, I'd never heard on the mainstream news. And I thought, oh, our country with all this freedom, we're losing it. We're in trouble. And what can I do about it? So all I knew what to do was to get into politics. And I always thought politics was something other people did, not me. As lawyers, you had to be a lawyer to get into politics, you know. But really, it's we the people. It's us. We have a choice of getting involved or not. And just like our ancestors had a choice of fighting for America or not. You know, actually, Civil War, you could have paid someone to take your place, you know, if you didn't want to do it. But yet, you know, Torkel Torgerson, my great-great-grandfather, he had just come over here on the boat from Norway and immediately joined the Union Army, you know, and paid a price for that because he's been paying the rest of his life from his wounds. But it's something that we can do no matter how much, you know. Either you can do a lot, just depends on fortune or fate, and or you can do a little bit, but it's all like throwing rocks in a pond. You have that ripple effect, you know.
Right.
There wasn't just one guy like George Washington that fought the American Revolution. There's all the founding fathers, and they did that together. They were all going to hang separately or hang together, which they did. So that was the miracle of Philadelphia that had translated not that many generations ago, a couple hundred years on our measurement of time isn't too much, but we'd always been ruled by other people, and suddenly it was self-rule. But I see that us losing that today. We were just talking, Rob and I, before the camera came on, about tearing down the monuments to Confederate soldiers, for instance, and people had owned slaves. But that's a part of our history. You know, people are products of their times. Maybe we would have been doing the same thing in their times, but it's sort of you know, evolutionary. It grows, you know, in leaps and bounds as we start appreciating our freedom and the freedom of others, you know, in Western civilization. Now, Western civilization, and America is a product of that. You know, it's not American exceptionalism so much that I'm an American, I'm exceptional. It's the system that we live under that evolved. So we need to really, we live in a republic, you know. And we don't live in a democracy as much as you may hear that. You can't find the word democracy anywhere in the Constitution. We live in a republic which has a rule of law called the Constitution. It expresses the will of the majority, but has rights for the minority. Most important, of course, are freedom of speech and freedom of self-defense. But we're losing our freedom of speech, I think, as you're censored. There's certain things you used to be able to say a few years ago, and you can't say them anymore. When I was a little boy, I saw a movie, I think it was a George Orwell production. Not George Orwell was the author, but it was like Playhouse 90 or one of those things. It was all in black and white. It was 1984, and suddenly it foreshadowed the surveillance state because the guy was in his living room and he wasn't exercising, and all of a sudden the TV, Big Brother said, hey, Citizen Smith, Winston Smith, you need to start exercising, you know. And I thought, how could that ever happen? But that's pretty spooky. Well, it can happen today. You know, as we come into these challenges, you know, especially for this next generation of transhumanism, you know, and the surveillance state and all that. And I could see how we could lose our liberty, even lose being human, you know, here in the future if we don't safeguard those liberties, if we don't speak out and take a chance, you know, to hang on to those things.
We are in, I don't like to say the word, but we are definitely in desperate times. Mm-hmm. And a good part of the reason behind Why America is so that we can get together and expose something that you mentioned earlier. It's hard to know the value of liberty and freedom when it's what you were born in.
Mhm.
I truly believe that's what we're facing right now, and that is why this is so important. That's why I love these projects and having you guys, your wisdom, your experience, to come on here and share with the world why America and why freedom is so important.
Well, I remember, I think it was Voltaire who said, he's before the French Revolution, said, I may not agree with what you have to say, but I'd be willing to give my life to defend your right to say what you want to say, even if I disagree with it. And in fact, I remember when I was watching news, they talked about the American Civil Liberties Union protecting free speech for Nazis who wanted to march in this parade. I thought, why would they do that? Those guys were our enemy.
Right.
But the concept of freedom is so important. It supersedes, these other things that expand out from that. So, as long as we have freedom, we have a right to say what we want to do. We can express our truth, as well as we want. But we should never censor anybody's right to say what they are. Now, of course, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's an act of aggression, so that goes outside yourself. But still, you have to have limited government, So you have to have some government, even like we're talking about American exceptionalism. All of these countries we came from all had their problems. No country's been pure. Even the American Indians, we think. It was the larger tribes that drove the weaker tribes off the hunting ground. So it gets back to, I think, the concept of original sin. But so we have to have some government, but I think someone said, he who governs least governs best,
Right.
And the best way to govern yourself is through free choice and through respect and responsibility. Lots and lots of individuals working together for a better life for people. If you don't have freedom of speech, you don't really have anything. And if people try to suppress someone else's freedom of speech, all of us end up losing, I think, because of that too. So we need to, the great thing about America is choice, We have a choice not to get involved. We don't have to get involved, but it's something we should do because we know we sort of have a duty to posterity. And I think it's a bad thing for one generation to leave a worse country than the one they were born into. And I fear that happening too. So that's why I've kind of gotten involved in activism and, so that at least the last day I close my eyes, always think of your final end, then I at least have a clear conscience about giving back to the country that gave me the freedom I had to be myself.
And that right there, my friend, was a beautiful statement. Giving back to the country that gave you the freedom. That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
We need to wrap it up. Rob Chase, dear friend, fellow Toastmaster. Rob is currently running for Washington State Representative, and I do endorse you. You are my friend, and we've been pals for quite some time now. So, Rob Chase, hopefully future state representative for Washington, Rob Chase. Thanks again for coming on to Why America, and thank you all for viewing.
No, thank all of you, and thank you, Rob, for having me here.
You bet.